Hello, everyone. Lewis here, back with chapter two. Well, the foreword and then chapter two of Ric Flair's autobiography, "To Be the Man." Um, as for why I didn't do it the first chance I had, I wasn't sure about doing the foreword. I wasn't sure people wanted to hear from Triple H about Ric Flair. I'm already treading water with how interesting this is. So maybe Triple H can save this. Introduction by Paul Levesque, aka Triple H. There's a scene in Fast Times at Ridgemont High where one guy is giving his friend advice on how to be cool, telling him to make wherever he is the place to be. Ric Flair did that naturally. Whether he was wrestling a 60-minute match, dancing with a harem of women in a nightclub, or just telling stories in some shithole airport in the middle of nowhere, Flair transformed wherever he was into the only place to be on the planet. Even as a kid, I could tell that there was a quality about Ric Flair that made the people around him look special. He'd get in the ring with somebody, and when the match was over, his opponent had become a star. Rick had greatness, and those who came close to him took some of it with him. Even though he was a bad guy, my dad hated him. I just loved Ric Flair, with his styling and profiling, and his talk. To this day, I consider him the greatest interview in the wrestling business. When I became a wrestler myself, I didn't want to be a guy who just got in the ring and earned a paycheck. I wanted wrestling to be my life. I wanted to be great. I wanted to be the Nature Boy. Why? No one ever could, of course, except for Buddy Rogers. But I've tried to emulate things that I saw in him. His work ethic as a wrestler, dressing the part of a champion, showing up on time no matter how much he had partied the night before. In every way, he's a supreme professional. Let me state this categorically. Ric Flair is the greatest wrestler of all time. He spanned generations, wrestling everybody from the original Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers, to Dusty Rhodes, Hulk Hogan, Bob Backlund, Jack Briscoe, Shohei Giant Baba, Harley Race, Roddy Piper, Antonio Inoki, Terry Funk, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, Randy Macho Man Savage, Bret Hitman Hart, Bill Goldberg, Vince McMahon, and Undertaker. His personality and talent continued to endure. In the arena, at 55 years old, the Nature Boy gets one of the biggest reactions on our show, not because of what he's done in the past, but because he's still so entertaining today. I laugh when I'm driving with Rick. We'll enter some town and he'll mention, almost wistfully, "This is a great place. I used to have a lot of fun here." I can only look at him and say, "Rick, did you ever not have fun in a town?" The man has so many stories to tell. If he were just talking about the part of his career that everyone saw on TV, it would be riveting. Then there are the backstage tales, the crazy things that people in our universe tend to do. Rick's role at the center of that, and all the political intrigue that goes on in the wrestling business. After that, we'd have his private life, the way he was allegedly stolen from his birth parents and put up for adoption. His inner torment as he saw his legacy demeaned and cheapened in World Championship Wrestling, and the struggle to reconcile his wild lifestyle with his quest to become the ultimate husband and father. Despite his public persona, Rick has managed to keep so much of this stuff a secret from even his closest friends. Now, because of this book, it's all out in the open. Invariably, People become disappointed when they get to know their idol. Everyone's human, and the image that you build up in your mind is often unachievable. Well, I put Ric Flair on a very high pedestal, high enough to look under his up. Then I get to work side by side with him every day, hear him talking on the phone to his family, and become his friend. Today, I'm one of the few people who could say that his hero exceeded the expectations. I hope you feel the same way. Ric Flair to be the man. Alright, I read chapter 1 already. So let's get to chapter 2, which is called Breaking into the Business. Let's see. After dropping out of college, I got a job selling insurance. I kind of liked it. It was a challenge, but I applied myself and did pretty well. I had friends everywhere, so I took the general agent of the company around, and we began writing up policies on them. He even wrote my dad's pension plan. In my first year, I made about $30,000, which was big money. If I'd wanted to make a career out of this, I think I would have done okay. I was certainly off to a good start. I also started bouncing at George's in the Park, not Pollard Park, the best dinner and dance club in Minneapolis. It was an upscale place, so we didn't have too many problems. We had one guy, Ron Kane, who we called our hitman. He was a legitimate tough guy with a metal plate in his head, and everybody in Minneapolis knew about him. If a patron was acting unruly, Ron would ask him to leave. If there was a problem, Ron issued a verbal warning. My record's 300-0, and it's not going to change tonight. That was usually all it took to get the person to leave. One night I was standing by the cigarette machine when I saw a big guy, about 300 pounds, walk in smoking a Salem. I gestured to the other bouncer and said, "Man, that looks like Ken Patera." The other bouncer shrugged, kinda. I knew all about Ken Patera because I was a weightlifting fan. I had just read an article about him becoming the first man to press 500 pounds. He had been on ABC's Wide World of Sports. In 1968, while he was at Brigham Young University, he placed third in the National College Athletic Association, you can't just say NCAA, tournament for throwing a 16-pound shot put nearly 66 feet. As a powerlifter, he bench pressed 560 pounds, squatted 820 pounds, and deadlifted 785 pounds. In his amateur career, he had won 4 gold medals at the 1971 Pan Am Games and set 84 national or higher level records. I went over and introduced myself. Ken was from Portland, Oregon, but he was in Minneapolis training for the 1972 Olympics. Vern Gagne, the American Wrestling Association world champion and promoter, was sponsoring him. Vern had been on the 1948 U.S. Olympic wrestling team and saw potential in Ken, believing that he could have a career in professional wrestling. The plan was for Patera to start wrestling on Vern's cards after making a strong showing at the Olympic Games. Ken Patera. Rick wanted to know what I was doing there. I joked, "Well, you have to be somewhere," then told him I'd been to Minneapolis before. My brother Jack was a defensive line coach for the Minnesota Vikings and later head coach of the Seattle Seahawks. Rick looked at my cigarette. "You smoke?" I answered, "Yeah, and I drink too." A few days later, Rick's parents were having a little dinner for his 21st birthday, and he invited me over to the house. His family was really nice, and in his room he had a stack of wrestling magazines about 4 feet high. He was a real avid fan. We ended up moving into a house together in South Minneapolis. We didn't have any furniture, but I was selling waterbeds, so I put them all over the house. One of them was round, and kids from the neighborhood would come over to jump up and down on it like a trampoline. I called the entire time I lived with Patera my endless summer. Ken didn't train until the afternoon, so we kept the party going as late as we wanted. For a time, he was also bouncing part-time at George's in the Park, so we'd bring a group back to the house and meet up with Mike Goldberg, who had been in another part of town and had some some other people with him. I never went to bed. I was delighted to have Ken Patera as a friend. It was great showing him off to people, and I couldn't believe the man's strength. After we both became wrestlers, I remember helping him train for the World's Strongest Man competition in 1977. We had a harness made, and he pulled a van up and down the street. I'd never seen anyone like him. I'd started weightlifting in high school, and now began working out with Ken. Having the chance to train at his level really inspired me. But once, while we were in the gym, I had to ask him, "How can you drink and smoke and do this?" "That's what all the athletes do in Eastern Europe, the East Germans and the Russians," he said. "I learned more about drinking vodka in Russia than I did about sports. As far as smoking goes, you don't have to be able to breathe to lift weights." Before the Olympics, he was trying to become as big as possible. I began eating like him. We drink 2 gallons of milk and eat 2 dozen eggs, yolks and all, then go to Burger King for 5 Whoppers. He transformed everything into muscle. In my case, 40% of what I ate became fat. After the '72 Olympics, Vern Gagne was looking to train Patera and a couple of other guys to become professional wrestlers. I was interested in joining them, but I didn't know if Gagne would be willing to consider me. Just before I met Patera, I'd run into Mad Dog Vachon in a bar, reminded him that I'd been the lifeguard at his pool, and inquired about getting into wrestling. Mad Dog sent me to a wrestler friend, Ricky Ferreira. We had one workout in the gym with no wrestling ring, exchanged a couple holds, went out for some beers, and that was it. I already knew Vern's son, Greg. He'd been at the University of Minnesota while I was there, and he was a pretty good quarterback. We had different groups of friends, but I always thought of him as a fun guy. The thing was that we'd never spoken about his father or professional wrestling, and I wasn't sure if I should approach him. You have to understand, Vern Gagne was like a god in the Twin Cities, bigger than even Bud Grant, who had led the Minnesota Vikings into the Super Bowl. Vern became the first AWA champion in 1960 and held the title 10 times. North America was divided into regional wrestling territories at the time, but the AWA had expanded from Minneapolis to Chicago, Salt Lake City, Denver, Winnipeg, and eventually Las Vegas and San Francisco. Everybody knew that Vern was the power behind the scenes. His television show was one of the highest rated in Minnesota, and he had a reputation as a successful businessman in areas not related to wrestling. In time, Patera arranged for me to have a meeting with Vern. Here I was, standing in front of this really big star that I'd grown up watching on television, and I was intimidated. I found myself looking at the floor, afraid to even make eye contact. Vern was about to start a pro wrestling training camp and wanted only top athletes. Patera and Greg Gagne were in the class along with another acquaintance of mine, Jumping Jim Brunzell, who later became Greg's tag team partner in the AWA and one of the Killer Bees with B. Brian Blair in the World Wrestling Federation. The other two students were Bob Bruggers, a former linebacker of the Miami Dolphins and San Diego Chargers, and Hossein Khosrow Vaziri, a great amateur wrestler from Iran who was an assistant coach on the 1972 Olympic team. Later, as the Iron Sheik, Khosrow would become the World Wrestling Federation champion. I'd always done well at sports, so I figured that if I kept getting bigger and stronger, I could make it. But Vern told me, it's not easy being a professional wrestler. In fact, it's a task and a half. I kept looking at the floor, nodding, like I understood. But honestly, I couldn't even begin to make sense of what I was about to do. I told Rick, "You were born to be in this business. This business was made for guys like you." Vern wasn't so sure. "I have 5 guys training already," he said. "I don't have room for 6." But he eventually agreed to put Rick through the motions with the rest of us. Our main trainer was Billy Robinson, an Englishman who had a reputation as a shooter, meaning that if a match got out of hand, he could shoot or fight for real and hook his opponent with a hold that could cripple him. Billy did most of the training, with a few assistants like Don the Magnificent Morocco. We start off running along this frozen creek, slipping and sliding. I'm not exaggerating. You'd have to wear 3 sweatsuits. The only way to stay warm was to keep moving and not slow down the whole day for 6 or 8 hours. One day it was 10 degrees. The next it was 10 below. We ran around this farm, not on a track, but on a customized path that went about 2 miles. The only one who made me look good was Ken. His legs were so big from all the squatting that they were chafing together. We had to do 500 free squats, 200 push-ups, and 200 sit-ups. I'd never trained so hard in my life. Not once have I ever done a free squat. I hadn't done push-ups in years. I wasn't used to doing sit-ups. We were doing neck bridges, calisthenics, jumping jacks, everything. Then we went to work out in the ring, which was inside one of Vern's horse barns, sorry. The horses were downstairs and the chickens were upstairs on the right. It was below zero temperatures with one light bulb in the whole barn, just dangling on a wire. The slats on the barn were about an inch apart, so there were times we'd show up to 4-foot snowdrifts in the place. The chickens would be roosting on the cross beams of the barn, shitting in the ring, so we'd have to clean the mat. The ring was all broken down. The ropes are flicked up. They should be tight because you're supposed to run off them, but these are actually drooping. Here's Vern Gagne, a multimillionaire, and he had the worst possible conditions for us to train in. Eventually, when it got unbearably cold, he did rent the St. Paul Armory for us. Finally, we had hot running water and flushing toilets, but before then, I tell you, it was bizarre. In the ring, we'd do 50 front rolls, then 50 back rolls. After that, we'd give each other 50 turnbuckle reversals, pulling a guy off one set of turnbuckles and throwing him into the set on the opposite side of the ring. Then you'd do 50 shoulder tackles, 50 flying mares, 50 suplexes. Fuck, it was unbelievable. When Joe Scarpello, an old-timer who'd been an All-American at the University of Iowa, came up one day, he said, "Vern, just took 10 years off your career." He said we took more bumps, falls, in our training than he had in his 25 years in the ring. "This is brutality," he told us. "This is uncalled for." I must have been at camp for 2 days when I quit. I called up Greg and said, "I'm done." I was dead. Mentally, I couldn't take it. Greg told his dad, so Vern came over to my house, grabbed me by the shirt, and threw me out on the front lawn. "It took you 5 years to graduate high school," he screamed. "You quit college. Well, you're not quitting this. I didn't sign you up to be a quitter." Vern said things to me that I'm sure my father had always been tempted to say, but my dad never spoke to me like that. It hit a nerve, and it made me want to prove to Vern that I was better than he thought. So I went back to camp. Life didn't get any easier after that. We'd have to wait in line to wrestle Billy Robinson, who would get behind you and try to turn you on your back, and you'd have to get away. Jim Brunzell would be standing in line behind me, and I'd try to maneuver my body so Brunzell went first. I spent the whole time thinking, how can I get Brunzell in front of me? It was that bad. Out of all of us, Cosgrove had accomplished the most as an amateur wrestler. While everyone else was out of breath, he whipped through the exercises. But like a lot of amateur wrestlers, he was always running his mouth, like he didn't take professional wrestling seriously. "Vern Gagne or Billy Robinson couldn't beat me on the best day," he'd brag. Robinson got wind of this, so he lined us all up one day and told Cosgrove that he wanted to wrestle him first. "I heard you said I can't turn you over," Robinson challenged. "You can't," Cosgrove shot back. Robinson had him get down, spread eagle, in amateur position. He got on top but didn't have the leverage to turn Cosgrove over and pin him. But Robinson was an expert on hook style, which was illegal in the amateur ranks, and after about 10 minutes, he brought the point of his knee down into Cosgrove's thigh, fucking up his hip. Cosgrove was in agony as Robinson turned him over and pinned him. "See? I told you I could do it," he crowed. Cosgrove hated Robinson after that. He had no respect for him. "Billy no coach," he said. Coach don't do that to student. Robinson was a prick. That's why he had trouble in different places where he wrestled. Sailor White punched him out in Montreal, then pissed into his wounds. The Rock's grandfather, Peter Maivia, nearly dug out his eye in another fight. Vern and Robinson were close, but outside the AWA, nobody wanted to work with Billy. They were afraid he'd fuck them up with cheap shots, and chances were that he would. When I saw what Robinson did to the Iron Sheik, I was shocked, mortified, and ready to kill myself, all at the same time. I thought I was next, so I ended up quitting camp one more time. I told Greg, "Don't tell your dad I'm not coming back." Some pages are omitted. God damn it. What? Went crazy. "Oh my god," he yelled. "Is that what you've learned since you've been here?" Just before I had my first match, I asked Fern if I could be Rambling Ricky Rhodes, Dusty's brother. I was ready to curl my hair like Dusty's and everything. "No, you can't," he insisted. "Look at the name you have. Ric Flair. Change a few letters around, and you're Ric Flair. It's a good name. You don't want to tie yourself to somebody else before you even get started." But to think how things might have turned out if Vern had said yes. Oh my god. Dusty Rhodes, one of my idols when I started in the business. His rapport with the fans was incredible. Leslie and I had gotten married in 1971. Wait, hold up. Did I read this already? No, I didn't. Leslie and I had gotten married in 1971. She had wanted me to convert to Judaism for the sake of her grandparents more than anything else. I'd always had Jewish friends and didn't have a problem with it. But when I went to one of those religion classes and they started speaking Hebrew, I balked. I wasn't going to sit through that stuff week after week. We ended up getting married at Plymouth Congregational Church in Minneapolis, where my dad was a deacon. As for wrestling, my parents weren't sure that I was making a wise career choice. They knew all about Vern Gagne's achievements. They just weren't confident that I'd be able to make a living at doing the same thing. Leslie was more supportive. Before my first match, she made me a jacket out of blue satin fabric and put fringes on it. I must have looked at myself wearing it in the mirror a dozen times. I was so proud of it. On December 10th, 1972, in Rice Lake, Wisconsin, I made my wrestling debut against George Scrap Iron Gadaski. Just before I stepped through the curtain, Vern instructed me, "Just go out there and do exactly what George tells you to do. You guys are going to go through." I hadn't heard that term before. "What do you mean, go through?" "Nobody wins. It's going to be a draw. Simple as that." George was the guy who set up the ring every night. In fact, around that period, I'd often ride with him in the rig truck, helping him out. He wrestled either way, meaning that he could be the good guy one night and a bad guy the next. He and I had no conversation beforehand. We just got in the ring, and he said, "Give me a tackle." So I did. "Slam me," he said. I gave him a body slam. "Take a backdrop." I bounced off the ropes, and when Gadaski bent down, I did a flip over his shoulder and onto the canvas. The bell rang when the 10-minute time limit expired. I had exhausted myself during the match and needed a place to rest, but everything had gone fine. I definitely passed my first test. Greg Gagne was the promoter's son, so naturally Vern had wanted to make him a star. I spent so much of my rookie year wrestling with Greg. We had become close friends, learning our trade and having fun at the same time. In the AWA, to break character and socialize with the wrestler who beat you up on TV last week was considered a grave insult to the wrestling business. You didn't travel together. If you were in the same bar or restaurant, you didn't sit at the same table. On the road, guys would occasionally go into each other's rooms for a drink, but no outsiders were ever allowed at those gatherings. In 1989, the World Wrestling Federation, in a bid to deregulate Athletic Commission supervision of wrestling in New Jersey, obliterated that code forever when it admitted, at a public hearing, that we were sports entertainment. Believe it or not, I know some guys who are still losing sleep over that. Part of me relates to them. I feel that I've been able to make the transition to what wrestling has become today. But once in a while, things do disturb me. I don't like seeing arena employees sit and watch while my opponent and I work out a match in the ring before the doors open. Recently, I spotted a TV reporter strolling around the building with his kids while the guys were rehearsing. That really aggravated me. We've worked hard to create a certain mystique about this business, and it bothers me when so much of the magic is given away. On the surface, the AWA seemed like a traditional wrestling company. As the public face of the promotion, Vern appeared to be pretty conservative. In reality, though, he was as wide open as anybody. He just picked his spots. When you partied with Vern, you knew this. At the end of the night, you'd have to wrestle your way out of there. He and Robinson always wanted to wrestle somebody on the floor. I figured that out after I was thrown around a few times. I kept hanging out with Vern, but once he got that look in his eye, like he wanted to torture me in front of the girls, I was out of there. After a wrestling match, Andre the Giant was another guy who loved to party. One night in Charlotte, I saw him drink 106 beers. That's a fact. Frank Valois, his traveling, some pages omitted from this book preview, the back and asked somebody to take a picture. Rhodes and Murdoch started laughing at me. The rookie trying to be big time. And before I could feel too much pride, I realized that they'd left me in the building, in the middle of nowhere. After the tour, Leslie was supposed to meet me in Hawaii, but there were a few hours before her plane arrived. Rhodes and Murdoch took me to the beach, and we got so hammered that I ended up falling asleep on the sand. When I woke up, my wife had been waiting in the airport for nearly 4 hours. Rick loved Rhodes and Murdoch, and he always wanted to be with them. Like him, they were completely out of control. Rhodes and Murdoch had a cowboy gimmick, and they really played the part. They also had this friend from Louisiana who'd come up to visit them. One night they were so drunk they drove to Louisiana, got a mule, and brought that fucker back to Minneapolis. Then they put that mule in this beautiful luxury apartment complex that they were living in. The place was so new that it wasn't even finished yet. They had a couple bales of hay and oats and water in there. There was this downtown bar, a country and western place, where the stage would come out of the floor on hydraulics. A lot of the customers were motorcycle guys, and it was pretty rowdy. Well, Murdoch rode that mule into the bar and shot a fucking pistol off. Of course, the cops came, and a big fight ensued. Gagne found out about it a couple days later and threatened to fire Murdoch and Rhodes. It was a big hoopla. I knew that Leslie didn't like the effect this way of life was having on Rick. I was living next door to them when she was pregnant with their daughter Megan. They were having all kinds of problems, and Rick was pissed off because she wanted him to quit wrestling. I told him, "Listen here, you cocksucker. I went through all this fucking effort to get you into this, and you're doing good. You're not quitting now." Rhodes and Murdoch had two saddles, a table, a couch, a few chairs, and a TV in their apartment, and about 8 cases of beer. I lived in the bottom part of the house for a while. I had to. Leslie kicked me out. We'd separate, then get back together. Sometimes I'd tell her that I was wrestling in towns where I wasn't even scheduled, and just take off with Dusty and Murdoch. Once, Dusty called me up to tell me that Kay Noble, a girl wrestler who I thought was pretty good looking, and Donna Lemke, a female wrestler who he liked, were over at his place. "I'm gonna put Kay on you like lightning on a June bug," he said, and I drove over there at 100 miles per hour. On another occasion, we were all supposed to wrestle in Mitchell, South Dakota. Dusty said, "Why don't you take the 10th car and come with us?" Ken had just bought a big Oldsmobile four-door and was out of town. "Ah, fuck, I can drive this car," I convinced myself. It can't hurt to put a couple 100 miles on it, right? We got out to Mitchell, in freezing temperatures, of course, and they threw me out by a farm in the middle of the night. It was pitch black, and I was starting to look for lights. 3 minutes passed, but it seemed more like an hour. Then they came back down the road, with Murdoch shooting his 9mm out the fucking window. I'm lucky I didn't get shot, or frostbite, or both. It made me miss carrying their bags in Japan. By the time we returned to Minneapolis, either Murdoch or Rhodes had burned a cigar hole in the Oldsmobile's upholstery. Strawberry cake was smeared everywhere. It no longer looked like a brand new car. I thought Patera was going to kill me. I was furious. I said, I loan you my car and trust you to take care of it. And now it's all fucked up. I didn't have much cash at the time, but I paid $500 to buy Dusty Rhodes an 18-karat gold money clip with a $20 gold piece in the center. Leslie and I were with Dusty at the country and western place, so I pulled him aside and gave him the present. It was my way of telling him, thanks for taking me under your wing and helping me become part of the business. In this book, you're going to read some great stories about Dusty Rhodes and some bad stories about Dusty Rhodes. Yet despite all the tension we'd have between us later on, whenever I think of Dusty, the good will always outweigh the bad.